that we could use parameters in Tableau to change the measure that was displayed in the visualization. And you also recall that we first created the parameter and then a calculated field to determine which measure to display. We can do something similar in Power BI using a slicer and a measure. And to illustrate this, I created a moving average for deaths by introducing a death moving average measure. And you see it's very similar to the one that we used to do the moving average for cases, except we now use sum as the method, the aggregation method rather than count. And I made a very simple line chart showing the moving death average. Just as a matter of interest, we can add the moving average to it as well. And we can obviously change what we display. We can change the window. And just as a matter, as an observation, what you see is that early in the pandemic, a spike in cases led to a spike in deaths, but that later in the pandemic, we didn't see that issue anymore. Now, in order to make the slicer that is going to allow us to change the measure to be displayed, we first have to add another table. So again, as we did for period. So I'm going to measure dimension, and we have cases and deaths, and I'm going to call this measure dimensions. Now, you will recall that Power BI orders the items in a slicer in alphabetical order. If you don't like, and I think in this case that's fine, if you don't like it, then you can add a second column, order or sort, in which you rank order the order in which you want these items to be displayed. And then you use the same trick as we did for the period slicer. So I'm going to load this in. And eventually that will appear. So here it is, measure dimensions. Now, I now need to add a new measure, which I'm going to call measure selected. And what that does, it's going to do two things. First, it's going to make sure, it's going to check whether there is a single value on the measure dimension. And then secondly, they should have made it as an AND. And secondly, it's going to check if that values is equal to deaths. So if both of these tests are true, that is, we know that there has been a selection has been made in the slicer we're going to add, and the value in that slicer is deaths, then we know we're going to want to look at the 2021 death moving average. Otherwise, we're going to want to look at just the regular moving average. Okay, so now we have a measure that can use the slicer to change the measure we're going to change. Now, to use that, I'm going to create a new page, and I'll add a slicer. And the first slicer we'll just use the period again. Make it a little smaller, and then we're going to tidy it up a little. So we make the header a bit bigger. And we'll make the items a bit bigger. Okay, so now we have the period slicer, that's good. We're going to add a second slicer, and in that slicer we're going to add the measure selected, the measure dimension. And again, we're going to tidy that up a little bit. We don't need the header, so I'm going to switch that off, but I'm going to make the items a bit bigger so that they are now size 14 as well. And then finally what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag event date into the visualization, followed by measure selected, right? We'll change that to a line chart. And then what I'm going to do as well, as we've done before, is I'm going to change this to the actual date. All right, now see what happens. So we're looking at the 5-day average of cases. If I change this to deaths, then you see we're now looking at the 5-day moving average for deaths. We can change that to bi-weekly, or we can look at cases again, and so on. So this is how you use a slicer and a measure to change the measure out of your data source that is displayed in your visualization.